Hello, everyone. This is Theo from Making It Make Sense with Isaiah, Jasper, and Theo. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and listen out for new episodes every Friday. Follow us on Instagram and leave us a comment at Making It Make Sense, IJT, or email us at makingitmakesense with IJT at gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Hi, everyone. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. 1, it's free. 2, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. 3, Anchor will distribute your podcast so that everyone can hear it, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. It is everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So go ahead, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Making It Make Sense with Isaiah, Jasper, and Theo. Today, we have a very special guest, someone that I have grown to admire, and someone who I believe has a strong, powerful, assertive, authoritative voice. We have Danielle Dufoe. And if there was clapping, I would have been clapping right now. Yay!
Y'all not old enough to remember Arsenio Hall, but there would be some whooping too.
Oh, yes.
I remember Arsenio.
So I want
Hello.
Isaiah
Hello,
to
people.
read something briefly about Danielle.
Absolutely, I would be honored. So, a native of New Jersey, Danielle Dufoe has spent the last 20 years helping vulnerable populations live longer, healthier lives. Her work is deeply rooted in her faith that affirms the love of God for all people. Understanding the critical need for workforce development to ameliorate the lives of those within the nation's capital. Reverend Dufoe has helped to devise government programming that addresses the complex needs of Black transgender women within the District of Columbia. Her work has resulted in fragile populations acquiring steady employment, abating housing instability, and enjoying better health outcomes. In 2013, Reverend Dufoe worked diligently with government officials and the trans community to create the nation's first transgender workforce development cohort a success. Today, a facsimile of that life-sustaining program remains, and nearly 10 years later, graduates of that inaugural program are still thriving. A survivor of childhood abuse and domestic violence, Reverend Dufoe is a consummate advocate for all who are marginalized and oppressed. Welcome, Mrs. Dufoe.
Woo.
Yeah.
Danielle.
Absolutely.
Hired.
You are hired.
Reverend Danielle. Well,
You are, I mean, my God, I just feel like reading that, I just like experienced like the force that you are. My goodness.
Yes, you are hired though. I mean, we'll talk about it later. We'll talk about it on the side about, your ability to, announce me even further, like, professionally
Danielle,
retaining you. Yes.
When you send me that, it brought tears to my eyes.
Absolutely.
Because there is something powerful about you, and there's something just amazing. The day that I first had a conversation with you and I heard you speak, I said, this woman is no joke.
Mm-hmm.
And
that.
Again, thank you for your time, thank you for being here.
Yes.
And just thank you for being extraordinary.
Thank you.
That's so
Thank
sweet.
you. It does not escape me that in order to have the opportunity to be extraordinary, I needed allies, right? And so I've even a conversation just before I got on with you, which I'm just going to refer to you with the endearing title of family. Before I got on to speak with my family here, I was having a conversation about navigating systems, right? Navigating systems that really are interested in you dying, are interested in terrorizing the hell out of you until you die, and I don't know, they don't necessarily set out to do that, right? But they do it in fact. And one of those systems is the Black church, unfortunately. And so the Black church terrorizes LGBTQIA folks, Black folks, people of our own kinship. They terrorize us and then expect us to produce and be extraordinary and excellent, as you say. And yet they don't support that. They don't support the efforts of those who can be extraordinary. So it doesn't escape me to acknowledge, if I'm extraordinary, then I acknowledge all those who are allies for me, and I appreciate you.
Amen. And I have a question. Now that you spoke about the Black church and also you being a reverend, how was that process? How do you bring those two worlds together for you as a Black trans woman, and that believes in in the religion or in the spirituality? How do you bring those two worlds instead of making together, instead of having it separate like oil and vinegar?
A great question, actually. That's a really good question. The reason why I think that's a great question is because, uh, so often it's said that African American Black folks in these yet to be United States are don't have a culture, that we don't have a definable culture. And here lately, I've understood that we, in fact, do have a definable culture, and that definable culture was for many generations housed within the Black church, right? So out of the Black church, we get the civil rights movement. Out of the Black church, we get this resistance to the enslavement of our people. And so thinking about that, thinking about your question, which I'm going to ask you to reiterate because my cat just did something crazy and threw me off. But thinking about that, I approach it. Oh, I don't divest from my Blackness and my queerness. I don't divest, so I don't really need you to repeat the question because I heard your question. I now understand your question. But I refuse to divest, right? Because those two are inextricably linked. I show up as one person, and it is the oppressor. It is the person who wishes to assert their dominance over me and my life, who would say, oh no, they should be separate, and often do separate them and force us to do separate them. I think about the insidious nature of how Black trans women are alienated from the Black church, right? Even coming in, like, our bodies are all we have, right? In this world, we come in and our soul goes into a body, and that's the body we have until we leave. So how do you divest from, how do you try to separate who you are, the totality of who you are, while engaging with family like the Black church or your natural family? So this demand for us to divest from it and to see these things as separate, I am here lately. I'm like, nah, that's not cool. I'm not going to deal with that right there. That, like, there is no differentiation. I am who I am,
And you're
and so
living in that normal, natural state.
correct, and it's normal and natural, which are two great words used, right? It's absolutely normal to have this human experience, and it's absolutely natural. So, I mean, navigating it and getting an education, theological education, Black theological education at Howard University has been a wonderful experience. It wasn't without, barriers, and it wasn't without some points that made me cry and humbled me. Discrimination, certainly, but it has been a wonderfully affirming experience to have done that, and still be connected with Howard University.
Shout out to Howard.
Shout out to
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So much about it's really important to affirm, like, an HBCU experience has been really important for me to define who I am in this world, as a Black woman, who is XYZ, who is trans, a Black woman who is fortunate enough to have gotten the education, a Black woman who grew up in the inner city of Camden, New Jersey. After all of those other identities, being a Black person who is educated by Black people who celebrate being Black, it still is relevant in 2021.
Mhm.
And it's no wonder why Howard University is known as the Black HBCU Ivy League, because I was having a conversation just the other day and somebody said, well, I don't know that many doctors who are Black. And I'm like, well, I would invite you to come to the campus of Howard University because everybody I know is a doctor and they're Black. So
there are plenty of them out there. They just need to look a little deeper. No, but I like the fact that you said that because as someone who grew up Muslim and is queer, I had to find that normal, natural state. I had to carve that out because the oppressor, the imam, was trying to make it separate, was trying to make it salacious and unnatural, and never providing me the comfort and the joy that one will get from the spiritual religious connection. And I like the fact that you're making it be known that do not try to make something that is natural unnatural, or try to forbid me from having the equity, even the equity in religious freedom and religious expression. And I like the way that you put it.
Or, when I say that Black theological education really, it really was a highlight of my life. At 43 years old, as a Black trans woman, it's been the highlight of my life. Certainly, I've gotten degrees and been educated by two PWIs, Rutgers and Old Dominion, but that education has been the highlight of my life. Because it affirmed me in so many ways, and it caused me to realize that there is no need to argue a point. There is no need to engage in certain debates that from the outset instantly invalidate who I am as a person, right? Those conversations do not even acknowledge my humanity, let alone my divinity. And so there's no need to have those kind of conversations as far as I'm concerned. Now, if you want to talk about if there's a theological basis for the exclusion of trans folks as queer folks or Black and gay folks, absolutely not. Neither is there a theological basis for excluding Black people or relegating Black people to the position of enslavement, as it was the case at the turn of the 20th century. Many theologians thought that the supposed curse of Ham was something that spoke to Black people and the generations of Black people who had been enslaved and subjugated. So there, and I heard you mention the Islam and the Quran. There's again no basis for those kind of alienations. Now, I'm not very familiar with the Quran specifically, but I can always. What I want you to know mostly is that theology of any kind is an ongoing open conversation. Like there are no definitive ansers. It's an open conversation.
It's
All
ever
of us,
evolving.
right? And all of us are mortal, and as such, none of us are gods, because we're gonna all have our day when we are the guests of honor.
I like that, the guest of honor.
Guest of honor. I had a question. Where do you think, and this is, I guess, something just that I've struggled with, just in regards to theology and then the presence of God and religion versus spirituality, and when or where rather do you think we get to a place where the Black church, or as far as religion we come to a middle ground where there's acceptance, where we don't feel alienation as a part of the LGBTQ plus community?
I'm not so interested at the moment in acceptance, because I really feel like some of the Black church is inherently phobic, and they enjoy their phobia. They enjoy their phobia. So I'm not worried about so much their acceptance. I am, however, interested in mitigating the terror, mitigating the violence they subject on queer folks. And I am interested in identifying that as counterproductive and not of God, right? So I hear what you're saying. I am interested in identifying ostracization, yeah, that word, of Black folks, Black queer folks, right? Of Black queer folks as being ungodly. I'm interested in that kind of like way of seeing that.
Okay.
Because I really believe that we give like words have power and how we use them and how we articulate, you know, oppression and identify the colonizer or identify the oppressor. They're very important. So acceptance isn't something I'm very interested in from the Black church. Inclusion, absolutely, I demand that. When are we going to get to that point? As more and more people continue to push back and to identify, look, you guys are basically doing the same thing those who enslaved our ancestors are doing, right? Only you're doing it in a spiritually and an emotionally capacited way. And so that is all the more detrimental. That's all the more detrimental. And so the more as we get, the more people coming to the table, wanting to speak out against this horrible stuff that's been happening, that's when it's going to be change. And I'm really encouraged by the millennials and Generation Xers, or Zers, yeah, Gen Zers. I'm really encouraged by them. Yes. I am absolutely encouraged by you.
I agree with that. And then in addition to that, and not to come from a negative space necessarily, but then
no, sure.
if there by chance, let's hope against that, but by chance there is not inclusion or rather or protection from the terror that sometimes comes with that religion and with the Black church sometimes living in that phobia, then do we seek to dismantle systems that oppress us? And if that includes the Black church, then so be it. What are your thoughts, I guess, on that?
You know, it's very interesting because the Black church is in many regards already dying because of the pandemic, right?
True.
And so time and providence, God's providence, is already dismantling a lot of the ignorant stuff. A lot of people are who were going to church in person and people whispering, talking about them behind their back, have now gone online, and they've gone online and they see that the preacher is like, who is he? Like, they can understand, as opposed to the pomp and circumstance of Sunday morning service. They now see that the preacher there's no sustenance behind or no weight to the theology being espoused on any given Sunday. Like you basically are sitting there listening to somebody who should probably go to school to get an education, a theological education. Someone who even though they may highly be educated, or degreed, should also understand what it means to stand in the pulpit and not at the last minute turn around and start bashing people that are the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, because we see that so often, right? People haven't done their homework. They didn't sit down and write their sermon. And so on Sunday morning, to keep the heat off of them and make them look good, they start victimizing what they believe to be the most popular mindset. And that's horrible in and of itself. And so the Black church has, like all other churches continues to undergo this sort of reformation. And so, but again, as we stand in our own truths and we really lift up the truth of Christianity, not what we got from the slave master, not what our grandmoms and grandpops got from their grandparents who were enslaved, but the real truth about religion, the real truth about Christianity, the real truth, things are going to start to be dismantled.
I agree. I think too, and you mentioned too, just kind of the that we're kind of witnessing that now, just as a part of the pandemic. It just comes to mind, my grandmother, just in her latter years, I noticed her kind of retreating and distancing herself kind of from the church physically and kind of retreating into her own studying, because I think she noticed a lot of the hypocrisy and a lot of the things that just weren't sitting quite right with her. And that kind of led me, I feel like, in the last, just in the last few years, to start having conversations kind of about, whether or not the thing that kind of was the foundation for me, as far as my religion went and my family, was actually something I wanted to continue to follow, or whether I wanted to kind of build from what I'm learning for myself. Just because for me, like, I didn't, a lot of the things that kind of seemed set in stone religiously, it didn't feel like it was going to be something that I felt accepted in, rather. And I kind of hate using that word accepted, but rather included in. I didn't feel I was included in that narrative.
Oh, and being included is so important. And it's not an arbitrary thing. It's not an elective to be included. Like, I was reading the work of Howard Thurman, who was really a great theologian of the last century, and he talked about the primacy of community, right? Like, community, his assertion was that we were born to be in community with one another, and that's such an important part of what it means to be alive today, right? We're not centering our lives around spirituality solely, right? But our lives are understood and influenced by this need to care for ourselves. And it's rather futile to engage in something like spirituality or faith that does not care for you, but in fact tears you down and terrorizes the hell out of you. So we now understand the importance of going to the gym, going to the salon to get our hair done, or the barbershop to get our hair cut, going to the dentist, going to the doctors on a regular basis to have routine checkups. And so religion ought to be holistic as everything else. It should be comprehensive. It should be a part of our lives. It's not separate.
Absolutely.
Hey Danielle, hey boo.
Hey.
My question for you is, so like, what was that like for you when you embraced your womanhood? What was that experience like for you when you finally embraced it and embraced Danielle? Like, what was it like for you in that moment?
I'm a bit of a different egg, but difference isn't deficient. Like difference
I
isn't
love
deficient.
that.
So
Difference isn't deficient. I love that.
yeah, it's not a lacking or wanting of something, but it's just it's so I embracing, understanding what it means to be a woman is something that will probably be with me for the rest of my life, right? Because you have to understand, like, okay, so you change parts anatomically, you've addressed biology, but then what it means to be female and what it means is those are two different ideologies. It's two different understandings. So I like being a middle-aged woman now, as amazing as that sounds to me. Life goes by so quickly, and it was liberating. It was liberating, but I also felt the crunch. To answer your question, it was rather liberating to transition. But that goes along with the line that, like, transition is like you do it and then you're done. No, no. What I want to point out to most people is that there is a commonality between, cisgender folks and transgender folks. And that commonality is that we are all on a journey, right? And that journey is lifelong. So when I was a child, I did childish things, and now as an adult woman, I do adult woman things and behave accordingly. And the point is that I'm growing. Like, I continue to grow even after a transition, a physical transition. I continue to grow, and that's the most important thing. And that is the most liberating thing too. It feels wonderful to continually grow and not be shamed for growing. Always seeking and thirsting for freedom. That's important because I mean, it's not like we get this notion of trans people, and this is very detrimental, but I think we also do it as Black people. Like, our lives are compartmentalized. And to me, that compartmentalization, yeah, that it's horrible. It's horrible. It allows us to invest into shame. Like when people shame us, we that's why you have DL folks. That's why you have transgender folks who don't want to acknowledge that they underwent a transition. They just want to be known as cisgender, because the acknowledgement of that process was so horrifying and detrimental. I've had girlfriends tell me, I am no longer transgender. Okay, if that's how you see your life, that's fine. That's cool. And you have the right to that. I actually lost a friend because she said that I kept misgendering her. I would say she's transgender, and I got it. I understood what she was saying, and I don't know why I kept doing it, but I understood. There's no but. I accept that I lost. If that's what caused her to distance herself from me, I accept that. And in the future, I'll definitely be committed to changing for anybody else who comes in my life. I don't think necessarily that was the reason, but okay, I'll take it. But whether she distanced herself from me or not, I take her point. And her point is people should have the right to identify however they want to identify. And she underwent gender confirmation surgery. And after that, she did not want to be identified as transgender. That's her right.
Right.
Yeah. So then you're like, where did you like you have this confidence? I love your personality. Like where did this like how did like where did this come from? Like how did you develop this persona that you have this like very infectious. You're very like the way you talk. I love talking with you because you give me so much life. Like
It's
where did this
called
come from?
power.
Where does this come from,
Yes.
Danielle? From Danielle.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Some of it is age. Like I cannot believe. Like I tell people all the time, like enjoy your life. It goes by so fast. I can't believe I'm 43. That amazes me. But when I consider and I have to say this, I was part of the first ever comprehensive needs assessment in Washington, D.C. And from that, we concluded that the average life expectancy of a Black trans woman is 35 years of age. That's a huge, like, that's like third world, that's tantamount to third world statistics. 35 years of age. So experience is what I'm saying has caused me to grow in confidence, but also preparation. That preparation is such an enormous point to becoming who you're called to be, and to be able to stand authentically in your skin and say, I don't really care what you think about me. I'm not gonna allow you to devalue who I am as a human being. And so those two things, just longevity as well as experience. But again, an HBCU education. And I will say this about the HBCU education part, because when I realized that religion had been used to oppress and subjugate Black folks, and when I realized that Black folks, my own people, had used religion, even if they didn't go to church, right? You get the wino on the street saying, "Ill, are you a FAGG?" That word, the F bomb, drop an F bomb. Even before you transition, you get that kind of those experiences. But you're a wino who I just see in passing on the streets, and yet you're using religion as a basis to ostracize and demonize and subjugate and oppress me. And I thought, this is amazing. Like, once I realized how religion had been used to enslave people physically, spiritually, and mentally, once I realized the heinous act of enslaving folks and oppressing folks, and that it is actually directly linked to my survival and my health outcomes, I was like, oh, hell no, I'm going to be, every day I live, I'm going to be who I am. Every day that I live.
You're living in that power.
Yes. I had a question about, or earlier you mentioned, and you used the term, it set with me, divesting yourself kind of one or the other, right? And so I guess my question is, when in your life do you feel like you truly showed up in your intersectionality? So in being a Black and trans woman, so being a Black trans woman, when in your life do you feel like they finally crossed together and you felt like you walked into a room and went, I am all of this. I am all of me.
I probably in 2018 when I entered divinity school, and not only did I not only did I show up as like black and woman, I showed up as black and queer.
Mm-hmm.
I showed it up as black and this and that, and so
Mm-hmm.
when I had to defend that, right,
Mm-hmm.
against religious zealots, when I had to defend that against black religious,
Mm-hmm.
in which I really I was most empowered.
Mm-hmm.
I was most empowered because not only my education but my experience had taught me that I could not be discriminated against in those places of academia.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But you know what I found, what I'm hearing as well, Danielle,
Mm-hmm.
that you, through education, through knowledge, to seeking knowledge, you also found a freedom and a power that would not have been given to you if you would have been following the okey doke.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
You
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
following the words of the oppressors.
Yes.
That's why I tell people all the time, stop believing what these people are saying. Go look at scholarly journals. Go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Go do your own research. Go become educated so that you can have a seat at the table and have conversations with other scholars.
Mm-hmm.
And you have done that. You are the personification of that. That's why you can say here today that is not an opinion, is a fact
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, these ugly, prejudiced, oppressive, and suppressive things are not in scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have the knowledge, the education, and the skill. Just like those creepy people that want to spew venomous propaganda. And that's what people need to do. I think if they're more, once again, like the person that said, "Oh, I don't see I don't see any black doctors." Well,
Mm-hmm.
what I don't see is more educated LGBTQ plus individuals like you or myself who went to school, who pursued careers, and who are having conversations with the people at the table.
I always feel, sorry, I always
No.
just want to interject to say this. I always feel that when people say things such as, I don't see enough Black doctors around, or I don't see Black doctors or Black lawyers, or I think it's because you don't want to see them. It's not because they're not there. It's because you don't desire to see them.
What do you preach?
Yeah. Yeah. I also know that in addition to that, because that's very true, and this probably goes along with that, that
Mm-hmm.
we busy ourselves in life.
Mm-hmm.
We busy ourselves because we are oftentimes intimidated by the oppressor or the oppressive regime's barriers to accessing certain things like healthcare
Mm-hmm.
and education and even spiritual communities. We definitely busy ourselves. I mean, that's why there was a crack epidemic. That's why there's been a number of things that are just like that are completely illogical. Because the pain of living for a lot of people is too hard. It's too difficult. And so we busy ourselves. And that is can work against you. It can really work against you. But I definitely believe also that beyond in addition to formal education, perhaps that you must always continue. I'm a lifelong learner. Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. It's
A
important for
forever
me.
student.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So then, yeah, I have a question. So, what does trans lives matters? What does that mean to you? What would you define that as for yourself? Like, what does that mean to you when you say trans lives matter?
Yo, King, I just want to say that trans lives matter because marginalized, those who are marginalized within communities who are already marginalized. It's so important to understand the needs of the least of these, right?
Mhm.
Because when you do that, you inevitably advocate for the whole. When you advocate for those who are on the peripheral of a movement or within a movement, you really advocate for the whole. So to say Black trans lives matter is enormously important. It's enormously important because we know that when we are able to think beyond ourselves, beyond our own scope of experience, that we become more empathetic and we become more engaged in dismantling systems of oppression. Like, not only do we see that we have a personal interest in dismantling these systems, but as we dismantle these systems, everybody wins. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
wins. So it's
Absolutely.
important to say Black Lives Matter. And it's also important to say Black trans lives matter. It's
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
super important to make those distinctions.
And I think and just to add on to what you were saying too, I think sometimes it becomes, Black Lives Matter, but then it's really all Black Lives Matter because I
Well,
think sometimes it turns into, oh, okay, well, straight or heteronormative Black Lives Matter, you know?
No, I completely agree.
Mhm,
Again, mixing company and engaging conversations on a
mhm,
certain social media platform.
mhm,
I've heard it said that why does the LGBTQIA plus community always want to say or liken their experience for fighting for equities to the civil rights movement? It's not the same. Yes,
mm,
it is. I hate
Yes.
to tell you. I hate to tell you. Yes,
Amen.
it
It
is.
is the
Yes, it
same.
Amen.
is.
That's
And
right.
not only
Mm-hmm.
that, we get to hold you accountable, right? If you were in that movement,
Mhm,
then you should not be seeking to oppress anybody through words or deeds. You should not be oppressing anyone, and particularly those within your own community. So, Black, queer, LGBTQI folks,
mhm,
you should not be oppressing. And that is why it's important to make these distinctions.
mhm,
That's yet another reason why we must make these distinctions, because we know that this crabs in a barrel mentality
mhm,
is a thing. It is absolutely a thing, right? And those who have been marginalized going on to marginalize and oppress and be abusive and toxic to other people who are within their community is a thing. It's definitely a thing.
absolutely.
and we spoke about the importance of spirituality and the true meaning of spirituality and the true feeling of spirituality for trans people and for LGBT folks as well.
Mhm,
So when it comes to healthcare, how important is health equity for LGBTQ folks and especially trans identified folks?
mhm,
Oh, about I would say 20 years ago, right? This is just a great example, case study of how important it is to um, access health equity for all people. So about 20 years ago, there was syphilis was on the rise within the Black and brown trans communities, trans women, and people were saying, "Oh, how can this be? Syphilis is so old," and but not more
uh-huh,
importantly than that, they were checking in with people who trans women, right? This is important to note. Trans women who would die from syphilis. They were dying from syphilis, and people were
mhm,
like, well, "Why are they dying?" Well, apparently there's this shot for syphilis, right? To this vaccine for syphilis, or the antidote or the medicine for syphilis
The treatment
is
for
the
syphilis.
treatment. Thank
mhm,
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The
mhm,
treatment for syphilis is administered through a needle through the buttocks, mostly, right? And so they would be diagnosed with syphilis and they would go to a doctor, and the doctor would administer this treatment in a shot, right? And they would still die. And they were like, what's the deal with this? Well, these women, this is a nuance of our community at that time. These
mhm,
women had uh, silicone injected in the dermis, into the skin of their bodies, into the hips, into the cheeks, into their buttocks. That was just mostly a practice, an illicit practice of my generation of trans women who weren't able to access BBLs, who weren't afforded trans affirming care. So here you have a contemporary example of why health equity is so important, and cultural competency within medical professionals, like the patients and the practitioner needs to talk, because if not, you have these really crazy outcomes, which people are dying for something that's completely treatable.
Amen. And mind you, syphilis, if I'm not mistaken, has been around since 1494. Since the 1400s. We've discovered that penicillin cures syphilis. But there it goes, but when you have and that's why health equity is important. When you have a conversation with your patient and you have your consultation, how are you having those conversations? And when you're having conversations with LGBTQ folks, let's focus on trans folks. A lot of people erase their experience. And I've been in medical office spaces where I've seen medical providers erase the experience of a trans person. If there's a trans woman sitting in front of them, they treat them like a gay man. If there's a trans woman sitting in front of them, they treat them and speak to them as a cisgender woman or a lesbian woman. And I've come to understand through my years of experience and my years of practice that you cannot treat a transgender individual as you would treat a cisgender person. Transgender people have specific needs. You need to have specific conversations, and you need to make them feel comfortable for them to be able to get the proper medical treatment. Because a simple conversation to have with a patient about, hey, you have do you have silicone, and also you need knowledge. And do you have silicone? You would have discovered this, because now here in New York, if you have silicone, we're not injecting you with penicillin on your behind. We're injecting you in your thigh, where there's just as big as a muscle as the buttocks. But because no one wants to have conversations with people that they deem less than or inappropriate, or I don't believe that this is an appropriate lifestyle. Because I worked for a specific hospital, I'm not going to say, because then they'll try to sue me and I'll win if they sue me. I worked in a hospital where a doctor said that I'm not going to perform this procedure on this person who was trans because it's against my religion.
Oh, wow.
And this trans person really needed this procedure. And I told him, you and your religion should go fuck yourself.
Period.
Because we are here to treat the patient, not to treat your religion or what their life is. And I ended up doing the procedure for the patient. But again, I think it's just something deeper. And there's something, because I see how trans people are treated in the medical field. I hear medical professionals use the F word to address transgender women and transgender men. And
or them saying the alphabet community.
Yes, which has become a little comical.
Derogatory. Yeah, it's a pejorative. I mean,
and I'm just like, cut it the fuck out. Like, I was very transphobic when I was younger, and I did my work to get to this point, and that's why I consider myself 110% advocate for trans people, and also an ally. And we end right there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yes. Love and light.
Love and light.
Love and light.
And remember, we are the new ancestors. Act accordingly.
Yes.
Okay.
Or you will get checked. Period.
Check yourself or before you wreck yourself. I love
it.
Yes.
That's right, fam.